The College Street Cycleway has become a bit of a symbol for Sydney's new direction. In 2015, despite a lot of public outcry and protesting, Duncan Gay, the roads minister at the time, tore it up. He did it with his own two hands. I saw him. He just kind of got in there and started. But now, not only has the College Street Cycleway been rebuilt, but after World Pride, it will connect to a brand new cycleway that goes all the way from Oxford Street to the one already built in Liverpool Street. But while the fact that the College Street Cycleway was rebuilt is fantastic, and the cycleway itself is for the most part really, really good, there are three pretty significant problems with it. Number one, it doesn't follow the hierarchy of transportation. Number two, it isn't well integrated into the existing network. And number three, while it comes close, it is not quite safe for all ages and abilities to use. So what is this transport hierarchy I've mentioned?
If you're higher in serotonin because you're more dominant, is that you're more satiated all the time.
Not even close to what I was talking about. The transport hierarchy is the order in which we should prioritize building infrastructure for different modes of transport based on how space efficient and energy efficient and naturally safe they are.
You know, because you might be at the bottom of a dominant hierarchy because you're just, everything about your life is ruined.
Actually, walking is at the top of the transport hierarchy, even though all those beta male pedestrians are probably always being run over by Sigma Ram utes all the time, especially children.
We're up to 9 kids.
Oh my goodness.
Our final little boy. Do you see him?
I don't see him at all.
Are you depressed?
I am a little.
Or are you just at the bottom of a dominance hierarchy?
Anyway, all trips, whether driving, public transport or cycling, involve some level of walking at the beginning and end. And also walking is just the most space efficient way to get around, so that's why walking is number one in the hierarchy. Number two is cycling. Faster than walking, even more energy efficient as well, since bikes can roll down hills, and almost as space efficient. Number three is public transport, usually more space efficient than cycling, but far less energy efficient. And after that, you have various car uses, which aren't really that important to this video. So how does the College Street Cycleway break the hierarchy? I mean, it's replacing a lane for cars with a lane for bikes. That seems pretty bang on if you ask me, but if you look at it, you'll notice that there is something very important missing. Yep. There isn't a footpath. Sure, there is a generous path on the inside of the park, but parks rely on their connections to what's nearby to function well. According to Jane Jacobs, all neighbourhood parks are the creatures of their surroundings. An important part of that is footpaths that give people in the surrounding city access to the park itself. Let's compare the College Street side of Hyde Park to the Elizabeth Street side. The College Street side is quieter with a lot more tourists, mostly people taking photos and walking. There are still plenty of people, but not as many and not as diverse a range of people as you get on the Elizabeth Street side, which is a lot more busy, a bit dirtier. It has a hugely diverse range of uses going on. We've got people playing chess and taking it very, very seriously, mind you. There are cafes, people are sitting and hanging out, they're walking through, and a lot of this does have to do with the differences between the office buildings and regular bus stops on Elizabeth Street and the tourist destinations and tourist bus stops on College Street, although there were tourists on the Elizabeth Street side too. But I think it's also sensible to deduce that the huge difference in the number of people on each side has to do with the lack of footpaths and lack of road crossing opportunities at College Street as well. Okay, so when I went back and actually ran the numbers, College Street and Elizabeth Street both had the same number of road crossings. So that leads me to the conclusion that it is entirely a mixture between land use differences and, of course, the footpaths. So ultimately, the College Street Cycleway should have included a footpath as well. And this would have had the added bonus of removing yet another car lane for another more sustainable type of transport. Another way that the cycleway breaks the hierarchy is that it feeds into a shared path. Its construction also didn't result in the removal of the shared paths that run parallel to it. The New South Wales Cycleway Design Toolbox identifies locations with moderate to high bicycle or pedestrian activity, including where there is significant pedestrian queuing and storage, such as busy signalised pedestrian crossings, as being bad places for shared paths. This is because cyclists will struggle to go anywhere, and important to the hierarchy because pedestrians will feel unsafe. But also important to a good cycleway is that cyclists feel safe, and this applies to the whole journey. This means that cycleways must be connected. So you may have noticed that the College Street Cycleway just kind of ends in the middle of nowhere, and this is not ideal, obviously. But what makes it even worse is that it does this around 200 metres away from some really key cycling links in the city. Number 1, the King Street Cycleway, and number 2, Art Gallery Road, which counts as a cycling link because the speed limit is 30 kilometres an hour. King Street Cycleway currently connects to the Pitt Street Cycleway to Circular Quay. When its missing middle is built this year, it will connect to the Kent Street Cycleway, which goes to Central and the Harbour Bridge, and it will also connect to Piedmont Bridge and hence the Inner West. Art Gallery Road connects to, well, the Art Gallery, as well as the State Library and Botanical Gardens. To connect to the King Street Cycleway, all you would have to do is to continue the College Street Cycleway around the edge of the park until you reach the pedestrian crossing on the west side of Macquarie Street. And if you were feeling super cheap, I guess you could just feed the bikes into it, as it is a shared crossing that leads to a shared zone, but as we discussed earlier, that would break the hierarchy. So ideally, a lane would be taken out of Macquarie Street until it met with the shared zone at the end of King Street outside the law courts. Now, once again, this would still break the hierarchy, but the area doesn't get as much foot traffic as Hyde Park. And then if that extra bit of cycleway was built to King Street, the connection to the Art Gallery would be a breeze. All that would have to happen would be for the 30 km/h speed limit to start the moment Prince Alfred Road meets St Mary's Road, and for that to be clearly demarcated by the design, for example by adding a brick surface similar to the cobblestones at Glebe Point Road. Just ignore the exploding bus in the background, this was the best picture I could find. Then all that would be needed would be a traffic light signal for bikes to enter the road from the cycleway, and we would be good as gold. On a happier note, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the College Street Cycleway will connect with the new Oxford Street and Liverpool Street Cycleway once that's built. The cycleway is set to be finished later this year, and once it's done, it will open up the city to heaps of people to come in on their bikes from the eastern suburbs. That being said, the design of the intersection between College Street and Oxford Street and Liverpool Road, it does raise some concerns, and that actually feeds really well into my next point, that the cycleway must be suitable for all ages and abilities. Now don't get me wrong, it comes super close. It's physically separated with a concrete barrier from cars along its length, and that is really important. But problems do begin to arise at the intersection. I mean, have a look at this. Would you feel comfortable with an 8-year-old riding across this? I probably wouldn't either. And that's what I mean by designing for all ages and abilities. So a separated cycleway like this one is safe and comfortable and therefore usable for a much wider range of people than a mostly useless painted bike lane. But that being said, think about the amount of people that are being excluded by a 40-metre unprotected intersection, especially when you consider that intersections are where most accidents happen. People who spring to mind when I think about who might be excluded by this intersection include children, the elderly, and people with disabilities, especially people riding recumbent bikes, because being lower to the ground makes you less visible. So I had a go at designing the intersection to be a little more safe. Now it was a bit tricky because most countries who have a lot of expertise designing cycleways tend to use bi-directional cycleways less frequently than having one on each side of the road, so there weren't as many resources available of successful projects to draw from. And additionally, having bi-directional cycleways means that drivers have to be able to look both ways when crossing the cycleway very easily. So that kind of added another challenge to it. So first, I had to make sure that cyclists were visible to turning vehicles. I did this for the right turn from Oxford onto College by adding a concrete island to encourage motorists to approach the cycleway at a 90-degree angle. I also made the College Street island less generous to turning vehicles. I did the same with the left turn from College Street onto Oxford Street. I also built the painted section of the intersection up into a proper raised island, since paint is not an effective barrier and doesn't work as infrastructure. Painted bike lanes are proof of this. As a result of these few small changes, now the longest unprotected stretch of the intersection that a cyclist will have to cross is only 10 meters, way less than the original 40. And this has the added bonus of protecting pedestrians more as well. Now look, I don't think my design is perfect or anything. I'm not an engineer, but I do think that it is a big improvement on what came before. Okay, so what can Sydney and New South Wales as a whole learn from the College Street Cycleway? Well, number one is that the transport hierarchy is important and should really be enshrined in state government law when it comes to funding and design and things like that. Cycleways must also be part of a cohesive network. Now, this is something I go into in a lot more detail in my Inner West video, so I won't talk about it too much here. But the most important takeaway from the design of the College Street Cycleway is that we have to get better at designing for everyone. See, one of the greatest benefits of a safe cycling network is the way that it gives people who don't currently have a lot of mobility under our current system heaps of mobility. And if you want to see proof of that, all you have to do is look at the Netherlands, which has the safest bike network and the happiest children. And while obviously with something as broad as happy children, there are going to be multiple factors going on, independent mobility is a significant one. It's safe for kids to go around and explore their city or town themselves. They can meet their friends, they can get more exercise, they can be more independent and grow up into more well-rounded adults as well. Now, similar things apply to the elderly and disabled people. We all know that our elderly people are lonelier than they should be, and part of that is because they can't access the community in the same way that they used to, because a lot of them can't drive. A lot of disabled people as well, maybe people with low vision, aren't able to legally operate a car, or maybe don't feel safe operating a car. There are plenty of modifications that can be made to bikes to make them safe for people with various disabilities, and those modifications are almost always less expensive than the kind of modifications that would have to be made to a car as well. So these are the people who have the most to gain from a safe cycling network. Therefore, it's really, really important that we include them by design.